Well, thanks everybody for having me. I'm super happy to be here. I have to say, I'm a little nervous. Never talked at a conference before. So, yeah, be gentle. This topic in the program had a very boring title, I was told. So I changed it, and nobody said anything. So it's called Controlling DevOps. And yeah. So it's I don't know. Do you want to control things? I'm not entirely sure I want to control things, but we'll see what happens in this talk. A little bit about me. Oh, that's kind of cool. I've been working in tech, I don't know, since the late 90s. I'm going to mention a couple like key points in my life so that you'll understand a little bit why I'm here today. So I discovered Puppet in 2006, and I nearly, I might have cried a little bit. It was really great. I had been like a one-man IT shop for a good few years, and it started out with 30 employees at a company. The next thing I knew, there was maybe 70 employees, and I was doing like kind of everything from desktop support to firewalls and web servers and data storage, and then I started doing high-performance computing, and suddenly I had like hundreds of machines, and I was still one guy. And so when I saw Luke Knies give a talk on YouTube about Puppet, I literally cried. I was like, wow, okay, here's another way to do it. And I had a very similar experience when DevOps kind of became a thing, where suddenly like all these problems that I was trying to solve, like we had a word to talk about, like, I don't know, scaling organizations and culture and technology problems and tools, and it was pretty amazing. And I lived in London at the time. I worked for Sony PlayStation for a while over there, and then The Guardian, and I ended up moving to Chicago a couple years ago. I worked for Sitter City. Now I work for Opinion Lab, and some of those jobs have been good and some not. This one is awesome, so I'm super happy with what I'm doing today. And I'm super happy DevOps Days has come to Chicago because I've never been to one. I don't like to travel that much. I've got small kids, so I'm like, I just kind of want to be a dad most of the time when I'm not working. So anyway, I'm really happy to be here. Pretty much every meetup I've been to, Jerry's been at, so that's kind of how I know Jerry. Anyway, so this talk is about a SOC2 audit at the end of it, or for most of it really. And there's this thing, right? Like I've worked with a lot of engineers now on the ops side, the dev side, QA, security, everything. And it's like people are smart and they're passionate about what they do and they work hard for the most part. And if they don't, well, we'll get rid of them, right? So, but things still happen. You kind of join a new company and you're like, people who haven't worked here still have their SSH keys on our production servers. Like, why is that? And yeah, we've got the backups, but that time you go to use it, you find out, oh, it's been secretly corrupted for the last 6 months or something. And there's other things like questions that I hadn't necessarily asked myself a whole lot until I started working on a SOC 2 audit, preparing for one. And it's kind of like, what code was released to production and kind of who authorized those changes? And some of these questions come from a very traditional, maybe more old school IT approach. And DevOps has kind of come along and it's said, we're going to change how we do everything. And I think it's been pretty radical for a lot of places. If you're a brand new startup or a small company, it's pretty easy to just go, we're gonna do things entirely differently now, at least from a technical point of view. People still really struggle, I think, on the organizational alignment and things like that we're talked about. But I care a lot about people, and I want to trust them, and I should, because I've probably hired and retained like people who are really good at their jobs and they care a whole lot. So I want to trust them and I want to empower them. And I don't really care if kind of your organizational silo means that you're a developer or you're an ops person or what it is, but I want to empower those people to add as much value to shipping code and developing our services or whatever it is. But kind of those previous examples, like there's really just, I think sometimes when people are kind of high-level knowledge workers, they're not so great at going back and having routine and maintaining certain things. And maybe the bigger organizations do a better job at this because they're probably more process-friendly. The companies I've worked at have gotten increasingly smaller over the last few years, and you kind of don't have as much process there. And because you're like, well, why would I want to add process? Why would I want to make people kind of view it as like bureaucracy or busy work or whatever? But I'm going to argue that there's actually like a ton of things you already know you should be doing. So let's just put some policies around that. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't suck, right? So this talk, I'm gonna briefly describe what a SOC 2 is or how it works more. And then how do you rub some DevOps on that, right? So how do we create these policies that are DevOps friendly? So I know I already put the slide up here, but I just want to say, like, I'm going to talk about doing DevOps, but nobody knows what the hell that means, right? What we're trying to do is probably go faster. Probably like the ops team never gets any bigger. We can scale up the dev side forever, but we're not going to add any ops people. And so you have to have better tools and all that kind of stuff. But if you think about how we ship code today, continuous delivery is something like, if you're kind of doing continuous delivery, like you're probably doing DevOps, but it doesn't necessarily go the other way. So I think there's a number of things that we all kind of know it when we see it, what DevOps is, and we probably also know it when it's just like not DevOps. It's not collaborative. It's not, that's not my job is something you'll hear in the us's and the thems and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, a SOC 2, I kind of have backed my way into this whole policy realm. I grew up as an engineer, and I'm in management now and have been for a little while, so nobody likes to make policies so much, or certainly not follow them. You want to go like build some like auto scaling infrastructure, or like write some new cool API. But when I kind of was asked to take this on, I actually really enjoyed it. I discovered a lot of things that were basically hidden debt and hidden risks in the systems that I managed. And I basically came out of it with a framework for how to not have all that risk in there. So a SOC 2 is defined by, and it's cut off here, but not there, the American Institute of CPAs. So if you have a financial audit, of course, it's accountants that do that, right? Who knew that they could also audit your kind of technical assertions, or that you provide, that you have good security practices, availability practices, that you can handle confidential data in the way that it needs to be handled, that you can deal with processing integrity and privacy. But the thing about a SOC 2 is that you don't have to do all of those things. So kind of back to that kind of, let's go agile, let's start with incremental delivery, let's iterate on what we offer. You can start small, and probably the first place you would start is security. And you can throw on availability and confidentiality too. This is all about, this is defining what your organization does. And to kind of step back a little bit, last night I kind of just realized why this talk got picked, and because I think I'd heard there was really a lot of great talks, and I was like, maybe they were just like scraping the barrel for content when they selected mine. I don't know, it's my inferiority complex. But I think there's people who think like you can't do DevOps if you like are in a place where you're audited. And I'm going to say like you totally can. So if every talk is supposed to have like a single driving mission, that's mine, is that you can totally do an audit. You can operate in a way that makes you very auditable, in the same way that you can develop code that is operable. But you don't want busy work, so you bake in your evidence as you go along. So just to get a little into it, why do you want this? So I've worked for business to consumer companies that they don't probably care so much about a SOC 2, because like you can piss off one customer at a time, or I mean you might at some level, like if you're trying to like, I don't know, you can have total data breaches at big companies, right, that are B2C. But where you probably are thinking more, it's more likely you're thinking about a SOC 2, is that you're a business to business. I am a vendor to many large companies, big banks, retailers, Fortune 50 companies, and they have very strict security practices. So preparing to shore up my company's practices so that they put us through. My security guy is here tonight, and he has had 8-hour phone calls back to back with the company to basically assure them that our security practices are good. I'm hopeful that if I can go, here's my SOC 2, some of that goes away, and if not, well, all my answers to those 8 hours of questions, I have it very well documented, and I can just go, here you go. And so the thing is, I'm gonna define all these controls around my company, and I'm gonna make an assertion about the services that I offer, and but you would just have to take my word for it, right? Like, we're secure and we're highly available. We can offer you an SLA of blah, and maybe we'll extend your contract or give you some money back if it doesn't work out that way. But wouldn't you like a little bit more than that? SLAs are like when you have failed, not you don't ever want to be there. So what you want is not just to take my word for it, but let's take that accountant's word for it, who really understands how a SOC 2 works. And honestly, that's really how this worked, is I worked with an accountant from a company that they specialize in this, and they were fantastic. And they really guided me through that process. But kind of when you look around, like who has a SOC 2 report, it's going to be like business-to-business SaaSes, data centers, and a lot of people, maybe in the more enterprise side, it's harder to come around. I don't know, maybe are people still fighting this battle where they don't trust Amazon? Guess what? They've got a SOC 2, only for security, not availability, or anything else, but they really do. So how does this thing work? It's basically a lot of documentation. So you would write a system description. This is basically like what makes up your system. So for me at Opinion Lab, it really is everything. It's not just like this is your tech stack and this is how your network diagram or how things work. It's actually your whole organization. Like, do the people who work in your ops team have the skills to do their job? Like, it gets kind of in the nitty gritty that like when I am hiring people, their job description should actually say the things that they need to do. And so some of that can start to feel a little bit like we've gone off on a tangent, but I think it's pretty important that like you either have the people who have the skills to do what you need to do, or at least you've recognized that risk. Like, you know what? When I started this thing, I didn't necessarily have a security person working for me, and we're like, we're going to hire the most awesome DevOpsy security guy out there, and so he tells me like when Heartbleed's happening, and he writes scripts and things like that automate like checking our whole infrastructure and really building in good security practices through our whole software development lifecycle and throughout our whole organization. So now you know your system, you're going to describe your controls. These controls are, I'll probably say this later, just for the auditor. It's describing what we're going to do to mitigate risk, essentially. And you write policies around those controls. The policies are what I would give to the people who it's their job to actually do these things. So I'm essentially like, I'm giving policies, and it's kind of awkward. Like, I'm telling HR, this is what you have to do. I'm telling the CEO, this is what you have to do. And across the whole organization, we're and it's a collaborative thing. I'm not coming in with like a heavy hammer. Like they can give me feedback and we can work together on adapting it to make sure that, kind of what was talked about earlier, I kind of joked that I wasn't going to talk about empathy, but I actually have a lot of empathy for making sure that I'm not adding burden to people's jobs and making their jobs kind of suck, right? Because who wants that? So I write those controls and policies, and then I make an assertion to say, like, we're doing all this stuff, and that's kind of my official like statement that I can put out there. An auditor helps me with all of that, and then he'll come back in, and he'll start actually checking for evidence of your controls. And I'll describe that a little bit. And then at the end, he's going to say, one sec, that he'll produce an auditor's report. Question? No, we wrote it the other way around. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Wouldn't you write the policy first and then the control? We did it the other way. I don't know. I guess you could do it both ways. And the reality is we actually started out with lots of policies. We didn't start from nothing. This is a 14-year-old business I work with. That's kind of one of my points, is that we're already doing a lot of really good ideas. But you need to kind of layer it a bit and figure out, is it still working for you today? And actually pay attention. So what does this have to do with DevOps? Maybe I've talked about it a bit, but accountants really don't know about continuous delivery. They've never heard of Etsy probably. And, so to create controls and policies that are DevOps friendly, you're going to have slightly different controls. And I'm just going to mention that like a SOC 2 is all about risk. And DevOps actually is too, in a way. Like you're trying to, if you ship code more frequently in smaller batches, that quantum of change is smaller. The feedback loop to when you made that change is shorter. And so you're mitigating the risk of making those changes to your system. And a SOC 2 isn't very risk focused, and I'll explain how that is. But what about ITIL? So I've worked really only in one place where ITIL was like a really big thing. And it also was a really terrible thing for me, in the sense that the ops team worked in a different building, and if we didn't agree with them on something, or priority or alignment or whatever, it had to escalate up to like, managers, directors, senior directors, vice presidents, and they actually reported to it was actually different parts of Sony. It was. So you're hoping that like these two guys in Japan will have a conversation and care about your tiny little problem, and so that sucked. But I'm not saying ITIL is bad. I'm saying like there's bad implementations of it, and I think that there's probably a lot of like if you are in a heavy ITIL shop, you probably have a lot of these policies and stuff written down already that you might not have in a small business. So. In small businesses and maybe everywhere, I don't know. I feel like there's a ton of more emphasis on speed. Like let's deliver, let's ship code, let's pivot, let's be very reactive. But the operational pain does not go away. You can end up with this burden, like this really big amount of tech debt in there, and if it's kind of like I can throw some more infrastructure at it, then it's not necessarily the wrong business decision to do. But I don't know, I think that there needs to be a better balance there. So sometimes if you put these controls in place, maybe it can help protect us from getting into that state. Really the way it protects us is not by creating hard rules, it creates conversations. So if you're talking regularly about the risk in your infrastructure, then basically, every month somebody's got to go, I accept that risk. It is still the right business decision to continue with this abomination of a tech stack or whatever. So how do you get started? It's pretty simple. It's not simple at all, actually, but the accountants wrote this, right? So that's the thing you have to get your head around, is that I'm probably going too slowly. I'll try to speed up. The accounting body wrote these trust service principles, security, availability, confidentiality, et cetera. Each one of those, they give you very clear examples of the risk that is under, like there's criteria that you need to meet to satisfy those trust service principles. Those criteria are entirely risk-based. So they're going to say, here's an example control that would help you mitigate that risk. Their examples suck, and so you have to write your own. And when you're writing your controls, you're always thinking, what evidence? How can I do this in a way that I'm producing evidence that I'm satisfying my controls? So what exactly is a control? It is a very specific practice, or a practice for mitigating a very specific risk, and kind of like layers of security. The auditor always tells me, like, if you fail one of these controls, when I come back and I sample your evidence, he's like, don't worry about it. Like, it's okay. You're probably going to fail some of it, but you can't fail all of it. And if you're failing like one control, or like 5% of your evidence of one control is failing, but you've got 3 controls that address one single risk, like, you're totally cool. So it's just the same way that we layer security and we build in like many parts of availability in our infrastructure and code. You do that here. So multiple controls for a single risk. So because there's all those different trust service principles, they started realizing there was a lot of overlap. And they came up with, instead of having all these repetitive controls, like, let's come up with a common criteria. And so they're going to talk about organization and management. That's where I was talking about like job descriptions and stuff. And communications, it's like, when do we tell our customers that we have fundamentally changed our security architecture? A lot of stuff there. So what does an example of this look like? And I really don't want to read slides, but recognizing that we're dealing with like accountants and that these controls can take 30 minutes to write because you're quibbling over the language, I kind of have to. So the risk here are that, and this is a very easy one to understand, I think, like, breaches and incidents recur because preventive measures are not implemented after a previous incident. So a very simple control here is that it's just like saying, we're going to have a meeting. The technology management team is going to review an operations risk register. That means we actually keep track of the things that go bump in the night. And we're looking for patterns. And so we're going to discuss like whether they were resolved, or and maybe even review the ones that were resolved to find those patterns. So the evidence of that, so this is the part where you're like, oh yeah, the evidence. And it can be just to like print out a piece of paper and get people to sign it when you're in there, which sounds like a real pain in the ass and busy work. But you could also just automate this. Like, you can just, so we use Jira, and I know not everybody's going to love Jira, but we use a ticketing system quite a lot. And I actually leverage a ticketing system all over the place for this because we already use one. And so I can just like set up a recurring ticket that goes, you guys got to meet, the technology management team has to meet and discuss this stuff. And so you can just put your approval right in there. And now when the auditor comes back, it's very simple to just search for my evidence. Anyway, is a control a policy? No. Controls are really only used by the auditor and you, but the policies are to tell people how to do their jobs. The way we wrote them, the auditor would interview me, and like I was saying, we already have a lot of policies in place, right? So he'd ask me all these questions, like, how do you actually do your jobs? And then he would write a sample control, and we'd discuss it and review it and tweak it a bit and make sure it matches not only like current state, but desired future state. And we basically wrote this in a way of like, we're going to fail. We know that, but we're going to iterate on it and wait. And at the point in time we're like comfortably passing all of these things because we've reached our desired state, then we can start publishing the fact that we are happy and we have this SOC 2 report. So how much work is this? I wrote about 200 controls. It took about 50 or 60 hours. I spread that out over 2 or 3 months so I wouldn't like lose my mind. Like I was saying, these are your controls. So the accountants, they really like, this is kind of where it gets into the DevOpsy thing, and I've only got about 5 minutes left, but they like ownership. They like very clear accountability. But what happens when you have a team that you trust and you kind of share, right? And there's not big upfront control. There's not a change advisory board. So DevOps is a lot more about collaboration, and there's probably more autonomy. The term the auditor would ask me all the time is like, what about segregation of responsibility? And I'm like, well, that developer, like, I'm going to need him to fix production problems, right? Like, I'm not going to firewall him out of certain things. Like, nobody should be SSHing into anything anyway, but sometimes things happen, and anyway. So if you have some criteria for writing your controls, like my criteria is like very lightweight, minimal impact to your workflow. Like, it's like when you're developing an application and you say, I really should instrument my code. And I'm going to do that like after I've delivered the feature. It never gets done. It never gets prioritized. But if you say that you're going to kind of add instrumentation to your code every time you're writing anything, then it just happens kind of organically, and it's maybe like a 1% overhead. And so that's what I've tried to do here. Like, let's make it so that when people are just doing their jobs, they don't even notice that they're producing the evidence for that auditor, and then we'll get that SOC2. So this is probably the key difference. An auditor really likes an upfront control. You cannot make a change to production unless I say so, and I'm accountable for that change being made. That's kind of like, how the old school works, right? But what happens? You always have that emergency process for making changes. Everybody just uses the emergency process. So DevOps controls are more on the back end. And so the team is trusted to make changes, but we're going to review what changed after the fact. And there's some tooling we can actually throw at this to make that pretty lightweight too. But because a back-end control is weaker, meaning somebody could fuck up production, right? And they probably could have anyway, but this is how we think about things. We kind of need more than one control. And so that's, again, you get back to like layering controls so that, maybe we missed it. Like we gave John access to a production database server for like a temporary thing. That's fine, but we forgot to remove it. But that secondary control might be, you go back and you look at it a month later, or you review that periodically to make sure that you're not leaving that cruft in your system. So I would say don't fear the policy, but then I'm like, maybe fear it a bit. Because nothing kills innovation like opening a ticket. I just saw that the other day and it made me laugh because like this whole talk is about let's use your ticketing system to like make this go away. I at one point in my career just refused to open tickets. I would ask ops of things and be like, you fucking make the ticket, right? Like I'm trying to do something valuable here. But I was kind of a dick, so I don't think that's a good thing. Like, so you can leverage your ticketing system by saying the points that it has history. It's easy to make reports out of it. It's easy to just kind of enter into comments like this is approved, even if it's after the fact. You can automate stuff. You can add screenshots, or if you've generated reports in some other way, you can just throw it into your ticketing system. All your evidence is kind of starting to get centralized. You can also leverage your version control. Like everywhere I go for the last few years, like development, they're working in Scrum. There's a ticketing system. Just use your ticket ID as like your commit hash or the name of your branch that you're working on. It's very lightweight. It already probably integrates with your like chat system and other things. And it's very easy to review. Like, I don't know how often you release, but let's say you're just doing 2-week releases. I get this big list of like, here's all the changes and here are all the Jira tickets, and an auditor, because like I'm not going to do that, but an auditor can like go back in there and go, yep, I see there was clear approval for every one of those things. And it might just be the fact that like we only work on stuff that's approved by virtue of the fact that it got put into a sprint. That works better for development. Operations, I can't stand working in sprints for operations, but the same thing is true for Kanban. Like, you can put that approval in there. Again, your tools and log your changes. Like, every time there's a problem, it's like, what changed, right? You want that culture of causality. Something changed. There's not ghosts in the machine. So let's record what we're doing. So if you're using Chef, there's a Chef handler. I'm sure there's something for Puppet or whatever else you're doing. Anyway, a really big side benefit for me was just uncovering all of the things in my organization that maybe hadn't been thought about in a while. And it's really just opportunities to make things better. I've got I put into the slides very specific examples of some of my controls, and like where it's like, here's the criteria we're addressing, the risk, and the 4 or 5 example controls. So when I share the slides, you'll see like written down exactly what my controls look like, but I don't think I'm going to do that now. And I would just say, like, this is just maybe my last message, is that if you're not perfect, it's okay, and you still should have ideals. So you should have this like ideal state that says we respond to all of our alerts. Well, I mean, I'm begging to see a Nagios dashboard that doesn't have like 50 critical alerts one of these days. And so like maybe that alert fatigue is a sign that like either your process isn't right, or that like there's some technical debt there, and maybe it should be on your risk register that, you know what, our time to respond to an incident, or our time to detect that we have a problem, is going to be a little bit high, because we get so many alerts that we can't cope. Too much, signal to the noise, or noise to the signal. So there's my detailed example. Special thanks to Mike Becker from FGMK, who, I will say this, I turned down working with a much bigger, big name accountancy company, because this guy was like, I'm the partner in the company and I'm going to write all the controls with you. And that kind of hands-on was great. He didn't like pawn me off to like a first-year accountant. Anyway, questions?
About halfway through, you bounced through something about having a common language with the auditors and the rest of the business. And I felt that you bounced through that a bit quickly. And
okay.
How important was that to you? Did that make a change to the way everyone thought?
I had said.
It was just, you didn't even talk about it. It was just, I noticed it was on the heading of one of your slides at halfway through. Something about a common language when you're actually talking about what the controls are. Terminology? Yeah, terminology.
Huh. Sorry, man. Hang on. What if I just jump out and do that? Yeah. He said that at some point in this talk, I mentioned that like having a common language to communicate with the rest of the business might be helpful. I don't really remember saying that, but it sounds good. I don't know how to. I don't remember saying it. I don't see the slide, but yeah, I think it's important. But like, this is not a bottom-up thing at all, right? So I'm in the position I'm in maybe because I was a good enough engineer to like get to this point, and a good enough dealing with the non-engineers that I can kind of talk in both directions. So you got to sell the business value. This is not cheap, and there's kind of this expectation that you will repeat that audit year after year. Another question? We don't have one. Yeah. Why was I chosen to do this instead of a compliance person? We've got like 95 employees. There's no like compliance person. Yes? Yeah. Okay, I'll repeat the question. Do I believe that having the SOC 2 will make some of these security questionnaires kind of go away? I don't know, right? Because like we deal with companies and they just go, every IT vendor, they do this. And we're like, hey, you're going to give us a lot of money? We'll probably do that. But if we are very well organized and already have all this evidence, then maybe it helps. And also, maybe it kind of reduces the scrutiny of like, sometimes I've had that process, like for a particular bank, take 6 to 9 months for them to just go, okay. And so maybe, we got a SOC 2 and we have like good answers and not kind of semi-weak answers, then it just goes away. But one of the reasons we did it, we wanted to drive down that time. It's a huge burden across a lot of people when we get those security questionnaires. Anybody else? Yeah?
Do you have to do anything specific to help manage the expectations or potentially the fear of your team members that knew this was coming? Or like, how was it received by the team members that were going to be impacted?
A lot of them are here today. So the question was, did I do anything to to address the fear that my team members might have of here comes this big top-down bureaucratic thing? And my answer is a lot of them are here today, so you can maybe ask them. I don't know, as a kind of manager of technology and operations, I'm always kind of fighting for my team to be left alone, to not be constantly interrupted, to not do the wrong thing. So I think they trusted me, but at the end of the day, we know there's still going to be that 1%, and maybe at first it's 10%, but we're aiming for something that's non-impactful. Anybody else? All right, thanks. Can you grab it?